Our next witness would like to be called Danielle.
That's correct.
Danielle.
Please state your full name
Danielle Mullan.
and take the book in your raised hand and repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Danielle, you're here to speak about your mum, Marie,
That's right, yes.
who's also here listening.
Yes.
She had a blood transfusion in 1981, a week after she'd given birth to your brother.
That's right, yes.
That was before you were born,
Yes.
but you've talked lots about it.
Yes.
Now, in your mum's later medical records, they suggest that a few months after your brother was born, she was jaundiced. As far as you're aware, does your mum remember ever being jaundiced?
No.
And in November 1981, about 2.5 months after the birth of your brother, in her notes there's a record of abnormal liver results.
Yes.
If we can have document 2429002, please, Paul, and it'll come up on the screen in front of you. We can see on the bottom right corner the date November 81, and in handwriting, picture suggestive of infective hepatitis.
Yes.
As far as you're aware, was your mum ever told this?
No, the first we seen of this test result was when we obtained her medical records for the inquiry.
Was she even aware that her liver function was being tested at that point?
Not that she's aware of, no.
After that, in your memory of your mum, is that she was generally lively, healthy, until about 2003.
That's right, yes.
And then you were aged about 16 years old and she wasn't well.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
She became very tired very quickly, took a lot of pains in her legs, just generally feeling quite unwell. We kind of assumed that it may have been a very, very serious flu or cold, something along the lines of that. And she went to her local GP, who ordered some blood tests, and was then asked to go on the Monday to the city hospital, and was then informed by the doctor there that she had hepatitis C.
So just before we get to the time when she was told about hepatitis C, can we have a look at 2429004? And if we look at the main paragraph in the middle of the letter, we can see that your mum had a history of heavy vaginal bleeding, and there were features of iron deficiency anemia, mild thrombocytopenia, but no other sort of indications of haematological problems. But she had had persistently abnormal liver transaminases and the past history of jaundice some 20 or more years ago. Again, was your mum aware of persistently abnormal liver issues? No. And then if we look at the very last part of it, I'm concerned, however, that her symptoms of lassitude may be related to liver dysfunction. Yeah. And then if we look at 2429003, and the first page of that. And the main paragraph headed clinical features. We can see there is a history of acute hepatitis, but again, as far as your mum was concerned, that's not accurate.
No.
But is this description what you remember? For the past 5 weeks, she's had nausea in the mornings, precipitated by hot food, 1 episode of vomiting, precipitated by a slush puppy. She describes a nagging ache in the right upper quadrant, which is worse on rising from bending position. She takes occasional alcohol. Is that your recollection?
Yes.
And there's reference there to having had no previous blood transfusions. Subsequently, it was established that she had, in fact, had a blood transfusion.
Yes.
But is that description of your mum's health what you remember of this time?
In words, yes. In theory, living with it, it was completely different.
She was told she had hepatitis C at an appointment at the hospital.
Yes.
What did your mum tell you about that appointment?
Her and my father both went to the hospital that day, and the doctor that she was speaking to just very bluntly came out with the information of you have hepatitis C. Had said to her, if you have many sexual partners, they need to be informed of this information. She was told that she wasn't to share a toothbrush with anyone. Drinking out of the same cup wasn't to be done. Any sort of cross-contamination would be very, very dangerous.
You've said in your statement that the doctor started asking about whether she'd taken drugs.
Yes.
And whether she had any tattoos, whether she'd slept around.
Yes.
How did you feel about hearing those questions having been asked of your mum?
I mean, it was really hard to hear those things, considering I knew that none of them actually applied to my mum, and the way it was told to us was as if he was trying to insinuate something, that he was trying to make her out to be someone that she wasn't.
She was then referred on for a liver biopsy and was monitored for a period of time.
That's right.
You were still at school at that point?
Yes.
Doing your GCSEs?
Yep.
What was it like for you?
It was very hard. I had a small, close group of friends in school, and I told them about her having hepatitis C. Back then, it didn't really seem as severe as to what I know now. Back then, we were told she had a blood infection, which in my eyes, I was thinking, she'll get some antibiotics, everything will be okay, although we knew that if she was to bleed, that we weren't to touch her. So I didn't feel it was a big secret, so I told a close number of friends, and word got round the school, and it started to become quite apparent that some kids wouldn't stand too close to me. Some of them wouldn't touch a bottle that I had maybe lifted. They wouldn't pass a ball to me in netball. It was like I'd become some sort of leper that no one could go near or touch, which was very hard, considering high school is hard enough as it is without having that hanging around you as well.
And at home, your mum was really quite unwell.
She was, yes.
And how did that impact you?
I, in a sense, became more of a carer to my mum than a daughter to her. I would be coming home from school, would be trying to make dinners, tidy the house, just generally trying to help her as much as I could, which took a knock-on effect to my schooling as well, with coursework, homework. I wasn't getting enough time to do the homeworks and coursework. I was having to do it on the school bus on the way to school, make excuses as to why things weren't done, and I feel it took a knock-on effect on my grades for my GCSEs as well.
You've described in your statement that rather than being a child, I found myself becoming my mother's carer. It was like a total reversal of roles. I was having to take charge of the household apart from times when she was feeling relatively well.
Yes.
There then came a point in 2005 when you were about 18 and your mum was seriously ill.
Yes.
Can you tell us what happened?
I had been at work and I came home that afternoon at a bit of a rubbish day at work, and when I came home she had asked me to colour her hair. So I had said to her, like, go and do whatever it is you want to do and come back down to me again. And she's been gone for, it seemed forever. And I remember saying to my brother, like, go and see what she's doing up there and tell her to hurry up, basically. And he seemed to be gone what seemed ages as well. But I remember hearing screaming my name from the top of the stairs. And I run up the stairs and he says, she's being sick. So I came up the stairs and the lights were all off in the bedroom. And I remember going in towards the bedroom and thinking, it doesn't smell like sick. I went in and I turned on the light and she was lying all slumped in the bed. She was as white as a sheet. And when I turned the light on, she had a basin beside her. And when I looked into the basin, the basin itself was red, and I could just see the reflection of the light on top of the blood that was in the basin, and the basin was full. So we managed to get gloves on and dispose of the blood and had to bring it back in again because she was going to be sick again. By this point, we'd managed to get one of our next door neighbours, who was a retired nurse, to come in to help us, and a neighbour from the other side to come in and help us kind of lift her up in the bed to support her a bit. We tried to get the hold of my dad. Unfortunately, he was at a meeting with my granda, so we couldn't get the hold of him. Thankfully, the neighbour, obviously with being a retired nurse, she sort of took control of the situation. She was on the phone to the paramedics, was able to tell them what had happened, was able to tell them about her condition, and things like that. So what felt like a lifetime before the ambulance arrived, the paramedics came in and they put her onto the bed, and I went in the ambulance with her, and my brother went with his friend to the hospital. Thankfully, by this point, we'd managed to get the hold of my dad, and he met us down at the hospital.
You were at the hospital and you were told that it was really very touch and go.
Yeah, so when I came out of the ambulance, my dad and my brother went on in with my mum, and the paramedic had asked me to go round into the A&E desk and check her in. And I remember standing and her asking me what her name was, and I told them what her name was, and she started asking me her date of birth, her doctor's name, and I just remember standing. I just took a complete mind blank. I couldn't process what had just happened, what I had just seen. I felt so useless. I couldn't give any of the information that they needed to be able to check her in. I ended up having to go around and get my dad and ask my dad to go around and do it because I just couldn't think straight at that point.
Could we have document 2429006, please? The first page. Thank you. And if we look at the fourth paragraph, in the comments, it says this, that your mum was admitted under one of the doctor who was writing's colleagues with severe upper GI bleed, was immediately transferred to my care. She was resuscitated with fluids and blood products and taken to theatre for urgent OGD. She then had further bleeding overnight and required an emergency salvage TIPS procedure to prevent her from passing away. Thankfully, that was, your mum was stabilised.
Yep.
And she was subsequently discharged. If we look at the very last paragraph on that letter, before she was discharged, she was going to be seen by King's College Hospital, and it was agreed that her transjugular liver biopsy from the previous year has clearly misrepresented the severity of her liver damage. She undoubtedly has cirrhosis related to chronic hepatitis C, and this has caused a lot of her symptoms and hit her severe portal hypertension and variceal bleeding. She's no longer a candidate for treatment of her chronic hepatitis C with antiviral therapy because of the risks to her liver. your mum was told that her liver was badly damaged and she would need a liver transplant.
Yes.
What were your thoughts about that? How did you feel?
It was very hard to process. I'd never known anyone who'd been in a situation like this before. So the thought of having an organ removed and replaced just didn't seem to sink in. I just thought it can't be happening. It can't be this bad. It went from, in my head, what was an infection that would be cured with antibiotics to a liver transplant.
There was then what you've described as an agonising wait for a transplant,
Yes.
which she received in August 2007. How was your mum physically while she waited for that transplant?
Very depressed, very, very tired. We had got our heads around the idea that she was having the transplant. The problem with it was there was no set date for it. So every day we were constantly waiting for a phone call, just waiting for that call to come to tell us that it was her turn. It was time for her to go. Her health at that point had really deteriorated. She wasn't eating properly. She had lost an awful lot of weight. Extremely tired, still very sore joints in her legs. Struggled to walk for very far. Just generally very, very low.
You've described that you began gradually getting to the point of no return, where your mum would be too ill and it would be too late to give her a new liver.
Yeah.
At one point they thought they'd found a liver, but it turned out to be a mismatch.
Yeah.
And you described that as a crushing blow.
Yeah. You wait so long for that call to say that it's time to go, and you mentally prepare yourself for that, to then be told, no, actually, just turn and go back home again. It doesn't match. So you go back to that first situation of waiting for the phone call again and preparing yourself for that all over.
You've described that at the very last possible moment there was a liver available.
Yeah.
And she was flown to King's in London. And the first transplant appeared to be a success,
Yeah.
at least initially. Can you tell us how your mum was after that first transplant? Maybe a couple of months after the transplant, she seemed to be picking up a bit. She was a bit more energy, was able to do a little bit more. Didn't seem as low, didn't seem as depressed. I thought I was getting my mum back again, that this was her coming back from everything that she had been through, that we were coming through the light at the tunnel. And then slowly over time, her stomach started swelling, to the point where she would actually look like she was 9 months pregnant, because so much fluid was gathering in around the liver. She would be brought in every few weeks, and we'd have pints of fluid, drained from in her stomach. She was well for about 6 months, you've said, and then gradually she
Just
got really
started
quite poorly.
Yeah, started to slip down again.
She was in and out of hospital having that fluid drained, and she was also suffering from jaundice.
That's right, yeah.
What was your mum told about the hepatitis C in relation to the new liver?
She was told that the hepatitis had now started to attack the new liver, which would then potentially lead to cirrhosis of the liver again, and potential for what could be a second liver transplant.
So what happened for your mum?
Well, she carried on having the fluid drained every few weeks, and I believe then there was another liver biopsy performed, and we were told that the new liver was had cirrhosis again, and that she would have to go on the transplant list again. But the problem with this one was that because she still had the hepatitis C, that they needed to clear the hepatitis first before giving her the second transplant.
So she became involved in a programme at King's London again.
Yeah.
And was assessed for a drug to try and clear the hepatitis C.
Yeah.
That didn't really work out for your mum.
No, the problem with it was that the programme had to be run in King's College in London. So she would have to travel back and forth to London every few weeks, every few months, to have tests done and reviews and stuff like that. But by this point, she had become so ill, as she had 2 massive hernias at this point as well. And it was just the journeys were just getting far too much for her, travelling back and forth. So they had to stop the programme.
But then in about 2014, she started another treatment programme here in Belfast.
Yes.
You've described it as a terrible 3 months while she underwent that treatment.
Yeah.
What side effects was she suffering from?
It was a mixture of side effects. There was severe depression, there was weight loss, very emotional, very anxious. Every day you got up, you just didn't know what version of her you were going to meet in the morning. She would have cried over the simplest of things. She would have felt really depressed, really, really down. I remember her sitting with me in the living room one night and telling me that if they came back and told her that she needed the second transplant, that she couldn't do it again. She couldn't go through it. She didn't want to do it again. It was too much, and she'd already missed out on so much with all of us that she didn't want to do it again.
Once she completed the treatment for the hepatitis C, she had cleared the virus.
Yeah.
And then she was well enough to be considered for a further liver transplant.
Yeah.
You were pregnant.
Yeah.
By then.
Yeah.
And what happened?
She was flown to King's in London. They kind of thought it would be better to have her over there, and be there for the liver becoming available. So her and my dad went out to London. They were there for, I think it was maybe about a month and a half, before there was any sign of a liver becoming available. And then...
You said that after about 8 weeks, the consultant said something to your parents.
He basically said to her, "We are flying you back to Belfast again. We are flying you home to..." "We're sending you home to spend whatever time you have left with your family in Belfast." Because they didn't think the liver was going to come in time. So she was sent back to Belfast again and was told in uncertain words, you're being sent home to die.
She flew back on the Tuesday, and you were trying to get your heads together that you were going to lose your mum.
Yeah.
But in the early hours of Friday of that week, what happened?
I got a phone call from my dad in the early hours of the morning to say that they had a liver. It was a match, and he asked me to come and get him and bring him down to the Royal to be taken over by our ambulance with my mum.
And your mum went straight over to King's?
Yep.
And the transplant happened in about October 2015?
Yep.
That transplant was a success?
Yes.
And how's your mum been since then?
I would like to say, okay, that's the only word I can really use. I can't say she's fantastic. I can't say she's got her life back again. She's able to manage. She can get through with small tasks. She can get about the house doing a few bits and pieces. She now has gout. She suffers extremely bad from gout. She has gout in both her fingers. She recently attended the hospital about 2 weeks ago and found out that she has a fracture in her elbow, and they think that is now that they think she's developing osteoporosis.
And it's been suggested that is because of the hepatitis C or the treatment for it or the liver transplant, something around those issues.
Yeah, she's not getting the supplements that she needs because of the medication she's on. It drains a lot out of her, so they have suggested possibly putting her on some sort of supplements to try and strengthen the bones to try and help with it, because it's something that will keep happening now. I mean, she didn't bang it or do anything. It was a simple case of she was trying to raise herself up in the bed with her elbow and has fractured it.
Although the liver took and it was a success in that sense, she's still had difficulties with the liver being blocked.
Yes.
She's had to have stents put in.
Yes.
You've been told that the next time it blocks, she needs to go and be flown back to London to have her bile duct removed.
Yes, which we've been told is just as serious and just as complicated as the liver transplant would be.
You've talked about your mum's quality of life, but she's also missed out on a lot of family occasions because of her illness.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
Just after her first transplant, my brother was due to get married. She was still in hospital. I think it was maybe about 2 weeks before the wedding was due to happen. We didn't think she was going to get out of hospital in time, so my brother had come to her and told her that they were going to cancel the wedding because they couldn't do it without mum being there. But thankfully she was able to get out of hospital, was able to attend the wedding, although it was a real struggle for her. I mean, she had a massive weight drop. She went from maybe about a size 16 down to a size 8. She was basically just skin and bones and was very tired through the day, but managed to hold on to be there to see him.
If we go back to that time between the first transplant and the second transplant, can you tell us what the effect of your mum's illness was on you?
It was very, very tough. As I say, I felt more like a carer to her than I did her daughter. I would have helped her to get dressed, helped her up and down the stairs, cooking for her, basically forcing her to eat. She just was giving up altogether at points, and it was trying to convince her that she could hang on and she could do it. For me, it was really tough. I didn't feel like I had what you would call your typical mother-daughter relationship. We didn't get to go out and do the things I'd always imagined that we would do, because the majority of our days were just spent in the house because it was just too much for her to go out and do anything.
And in terms of your own work and career, how did it affect you?
It was very tough. One of my jobs I actually lost through attendance for forever having to take time off work to look after her, because she could be okay one day and then the next day she could be violently ill, extremely weak. So I would have to phone into work and tell them I couldn't come in because I had to look after her at home. So subsequently of that, I lost a job through that as well.
But you also recall that in your 20s, the only way of blocking out the upset and stress about your mum was to go out and to work and work very long hours.
Yeah, by this stage I was working in a bar and restaurant, and anyone who's worked in that industry will know it's long hours in general anyway. But if there was the opportunity to do extra hours, to stay on, to work late, I took every opportunity I could, because it had just become so hard at home, with her and watching her. So my way of coping with it was to just throw myself into work. It distracted me from it. For those few hours, I didn't have to think. I didn't have to think about what was going on at home.
And even after the second transplant, you have still been struggling with that need to care for your mum,
yeah,
and worrying about her?
Yeah, well, I'd only just recently become a mum myself, and every day I would get up, I would get the child dressed, and we would go straight down to my mum's house. I only live 10 minutes away from my mum anyway, so we would spend most of the day down there just talking to her, you know, just having someone there with her to keep her company, make sure she was okay, you know. Sometimes just trying to help her up the stairs was a challenge on its own, but we done it.
And in fact, you've learnt to drive specifically to help your mum.
Yes, to many road users I feel they will say that was the worst decision ever made. But yes, I did. I learned to drive just for the sheer fact that if anything did happen to her, if she was rushed to hospital, if anything needed done, I could just jump in the car and go as soon as needed be.
You've also always been worried about whether you are infected and your daughter. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us about that?
It's probably quite irrationally thought about, but obviously because she had the blood transfusion before she had me, there was always that chance. I mean, I shared her blood for 9 months while she was carrying me. Once we found out about the hepatitis C, I went and spoke to a doctor in our local surgery and asked to be tested. It wasn't our normal doctor, it was one who was in covering for someone else. And when he asked why I wanted tested, and I explained, and his response to me was, well, if I get you tested, you know you have to declare to insurance companies, life insurance, dental practices that you've been tested. And I says, why do I have to tell them that if I'm only being tested? Surely if it's only it comes back positive that I would need to tell. And he says, you just need to be careful with who you tell these kind of things to.
And that you've been told that the chances of you having hepatitis C are slim.
Yeah.
But you're still worried about that word chance.
Yeah, well, I mean, it lay dormant in my mum for 20 odd years before it made showed any symptoms on her. So for me, it was almost like a bit of a ticking time bomb. When I took that scale of 20 years, when I got to my 20th birthday, I thought if I got a cold, a cough, something unusual was happening, I thought, is this it? Is it starting to appear? Could this be it? Another year went by, seemed to get further and further. They tested me and the test came back clear, which was fine. But I don't think there's a doctor out there that would be willing to say or sign a bit of paper to say that there was never a chance that I could ever contract this.
And it's not just about your own worries, about your own health. You're also often concerned about any of your family if they've gone somewhere and don't contact you. Yeah,
so for me, it's more an anxious thing. I get very anxious if I don't hear from someone. If they've told me they'll ring me and I don't hear from them. I speak to my mum 3 times a day, morning, on my break in work, and later on that night before I go to bed. If she goes to the hospital for an appointment, I have to phone her as soon as I know she's out to know, A, that everything's okay. I keep copies of her medication in my bag, so I always know what medication she's on. If they take her off any medication, I have to change my list so I know what she's on. It changed me as a person. I would have been quite a carefree person to say, whereas now I am continuously nervous. I am always anxious. I always think, what's next? What's the next thing that's going to be thrown at us?
An older member of your family has also become ill recently, and you've had to take on the power of attorney for them.
Yeah.
And you say that your mum would have dealt with that if she hadn't been unwell.
Yeah.
But instead it's fallen on you to support the older members of your family.
Yeah. So I became quite unwell at the beginning of last year, and the decision was made for her to go into a care home. At the time, Mum was still waiting for word to go over to King's to potentially have her the bile duct removed. So in my head, it made sense for me, along with my auntie, to take on the role of power of attorney. Obviously because Mum could be away at any point, and if we needed stuff done, she couldn't do anything. She wasn't mentally ready to do anything like that either. She had all this running around in the back of her head on top of everything that was going on with her mother as well. So I naively thought, how hard can it be? It'll be filling in a bit of paperwork, making a few phone calls. I couldn't have got it more wrong if I'd have tried.
And the stress all got on top of you in March of this year.
It did. I got up that morning and I had a really, really bad migraine, but I had to go to work anyway. And I went into work and I asked for some painkillers and went about the town, came back into work. And I remember coming down and standing at the till, and I was serving customers and they were handing stuff to me at one side, and I was trying to take it from them from the other side. All my vision had gone off. One of my colleagues beside me, I remember saying, does my face look funny? You know, it felt funny, and I knew by the look on his face. And he says, just go to the other side, go to the other counter. Thankfully, I work in a chemist, so we had a pharmacist who was there, and I went and spoke to them. By this point, I couldn't talk. I was just standing, and the last thing I remember hearing is, she's going, she's going, she's gone. And that was me. I collapsed on the floor. I could hear what was going on around me, but I couldn't respond to anyone. I couldn't tell anyone what was happening, how I was feeling. I remember hearing the pharmacist on the phone to the paramedics telling them that she believed I'd had a stroke. I had stroke-like symptoms. I had the fallen face. I couldn't lift my arms. I couldn't talk. The ambulance came and took me to the Royal. And right up until I came out of the CT scanner, I was being treated for a stroke. Thankfully, it came back that it wasn't. It was what they call a stress-induced migraine, which was obviously everything to do with what happened with me. By this point, my mum and dad were in London, potentially waiting to get the bile duct removed. But I couldn't tell my mum and dad that this had happened because they were already going through enough in London, so I had to pretend that my boss had given me time off work, and that's why I was able to talk to her during the day until someone in the family dobbed me in and told her. And she found out the truth, and I got a very angry phone call from her to say that she was coming home, no matter what was going on in London, she was coming home to me. But I told her it was fine, I was okay, it was done, and getting her sorted was more important.
That's been the impact on you. It's also impacted your father.
Yep.
He retired early to care for your mum.
He did, yes. He left a very good job to care for her. I mean, you tend to forget the other people that it's affecting. So the likes of my dad, who had to go to London with her and be over with her all the time. So he was on his own pretty much. Now, thankfully, my uncle, who lives in London, doesn't live too far from the hospital. So my dad was able to talk to him, but he would have been there from visiting time in the morning right through till maybe 8 o'clock at night. And he'd have sat in that hospital all day with her and never left her side.
Throughout this time, has any counselling or psychological support or therapy been offered or provided to you or your parents?
No.
After the first liver transplant, the consultant asked your mother whether she'd ever had a blood transfusion, and that was the first time you all realised that that was how she'd contracted the hepatitis C.
Yeah.
How did you feel when you all realised that?
It's hard to describe because, as I said before, you go to hospital to get better. You only go to hospital if you're unwell. You go to hospital to get better. You don't go to hospital expecting to have your whole life turned upside down over something that you didn't even know was happening. So it was such a surreal feeling to know that someone knew that this blood was contaminated, that they knew that by doing this they were potentially opening a massive can of worms for her later in life, and they chose not to say or do anything about that.
Your father was then encouraged to try and obtain records of the blood transfusion that your mum had had so they could apply to the Skipton Fund.
Yeah.
Do you know what happened about those records?
As far as I'm aware, he went to obtain the records, and when he got there, they told him, I could be wrong, don't quote me to this, there was either a fire or a flood of the records office, so only a small amount of records actually survived and could be obtained.
He was given 5 or 6 A4 pages of scribbled notes, none of which referred to the transfusion.
Yeah.
But then there was also a document with a photocopy of an empty blood transfusion blood product bag
Yep.
in there, and that was enough to show that that's what had infected your mum from the
Yeah.
blood numbers.
They didn't seem to argue it or try and make anything about it. So for me, that was enough for them to say, yep, that's all we need to see.
Do you have any? Your mum applied through the Skipton and received payments through it. Do you have any comments you want to make about the process of applying to both the Skipton and the Northern Irish scheme?
I mean, listening to some of the stories that we've listened to between yesterday and today and from London, you know, they all seem to have real difficulty with it. I have to admit we've been very, very lucky that it was quite a straightforward process for us. She was accepted for it, and there's never been any argument against it. So we have been very, very lucky in that sense.
Those are the questions I have for you. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
First of all, I'd like to thank Sir Brian for bringing the inquiry to Belfast to give us our chance to have our say. We are very small but very big at the same time. I'd like to thank our family and friends who have supported us through all of this process. And to everyone here today, everyone who's involved in this quarry, you're not alone. We're in this together, and no matter what, we will get the answers that we deserve.
I'm just going to ask Mr. Williams, who, as you know, represents you. He doesn't have anything.
Well, I have nothing for myself to ask, just to thank you very much indeed for coming to tell us about what your life has been like and what your mother's life has been like. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Ms. Fraser-Butler, we'll take a break until 22:02.
And then this afternoon we will be hearing from anonymous witnesses, and so there will be no live stream for those who are watching it now. There will be audio but no visual.
There will be audio but no visual?
Sorry, I'm corrected. There's no live stream at all.
That's what I
Apologies.
had been told
Apologies.
earlier. And the reason for that, I think, is that the evidence which is likely to be given is by witnesses who will find it very difficult to give an account they feel comfortable with without mentioning names of people close to them, which could lead to their identification. And for that reason, anyone who is out there listening to this as it is being live streamed, or for that matter, anyone here who was thinking of watching it at home later on this afternoon, you won't be able to do that. The transcript will be published in due course once any names which might identify have been redacted, blacked out, so that there will be a record of what is being said. It just won't have anything which identifies witnesses who do not want to be identified.
The audio will also be available after we've done a similar redaction process.
Thank you. 22:02.